Now, some interesting things happening to Labor in the UK. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair, the only Labor leader, of course, to win an election in the last 4 decades for Labor, says woke culture is tearing his party apart. We'll discuss this. Let's bring the international panel. From Canberra, co-host of Outsiders, James Morrow, and from Sydney, the Executive Director of the Menzies Research Centre, Nick Cater. Blair's bang on the money here, Nick Cater. There's proof. Here's a little tally. 10 seats held by members of Blair's first cabinet, including the seats held by Blair and Gordon Brown, both of them, all now in Tory hands. It's a wholesale realignment with this move to the hard left, isn't it?
Well, it is. At the northeast of England, which is where Blair's seat was, it's just incredible to me, 30 years after I was working there, that has now become Conservative territory. I mean, that's like losing the working class heartland. And I think Blair is dead right. I think this, woke, as we call it, doesn't go down too well. And I think what's an interesting thing is happening on the left, Peter, at the moment. In the States, you notice it too. I think since Trump's defeat, there's less of a need to sort of wear your blue cap or your red cap. And people like Naomi Wolf, for goodness sake, who's way out there on the left as a writer, is coming out against woke. So what I see is a great backlash, and Tony Blair is dead right for Labor's future. But it's encouraging to see that the backlash against this peculiar kind of ideology is on both sides now.
What about the fireworks in Washington, D.C., James? One of the fiercest critics of Trump, Liz Cheney, she's been removed from a leadership position in the Republican Party. I think it's actually, she's the daughter of the former Vice President, for those who don't across her sort of background, but she was the Republican House Conference Chair. She was dumped from that position, not because she criticised Donald Trump, but she was criticising him from a leadership role that she had, and she wouldn't stop. Now, all for free speech, but when you're representing the broad sort of church of the Republican Party, she's had to go. But what does this say about the direction of the Republican Party into the next term? Clearly, even those who mightn't have been Trump fans are accepting they've got to stay with sort of the Trump audience. I'm guessing, is that right?
Well, I think that's right. And I mean, the problem that Liz Cheney had here is that she had the problem of so many other never-Trump Republicans who were so offended by Trump, his mannerisms, his demeanor, and the fact that he, took them away from that old sort of country club Republicanism as espoused by, Mitt Romney and people like that. She was far more interested in fighting with Trump, fighting with the populist wing of her party than she was arguing with and fighting Joe Biden and the Democrats. And that's what the people who voted her out said. She had to be targeting Biden, the Democrats who are driving the country into the ground, not Donald Trump. And, it's not about whether or not Trump comes back in 2024. I frankly think that somebody like Ron DeSantis from Florida is far more likely to get that nomination. Mm-hmm. But it's about unity, and it's about taking shots at the real enemy, which is Joe Biden and the Democrats.
Nick, I want to go back to the Israel issue, but from a money perspective, Australia ended direct aid to the Palestinian authorities in 2018. It was a demand of Tony Abbott. Julie Bishop eventually capitulated on that one. But we handed them almost $30 million to a range of organisations, Palestinian territories, UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees was one of them. Trump cut all funding to that particular agency, UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, because he argued there were links to extremist groups. Do we have to have a look at our aid to this new body? We've cancelled one, sure, but we've still got money going to another that the US had cancelled.
Well, I think we do, Peter, and this is a classic case of showing that aid money is not the solution, right? I mean, the Palestinians get more per person in aid money from around the world than any other place on earth, and yet clearly a lot of that is not getting through to the people who need it on the ground. It's being siphoned off by the Palestinian authorities, who I think are largely to blame for this latest conflict too. I mean, they are the ones that are picking these conflicts strategically for their own reasons, trying to disrail any kind of peace between Israel and the Palestinians deliberately. And that, of course, is the only people that suffer on that, or the people who suffer the most, are the Palestinian people.
James, just quickly, I mean, I thought of you the other day when they had the footage of Sderot, the bombings of Sderot. You and I, not so long ago, were in Sderot together. We heard the sirens. We were up north in the Hezbollah border country. How does this make you feel? I mean, I know I kept thinking the whole time I was there, anyone who leaves a backpack around could be a suicide bomber. It was unsettling, and we were there in a time of relative peace. You got to feel for the people of Israel tonight.
Absolutely. I feel for the people of Israel. I have lots of friends over there who are right now, very nervous. But I think that this is also part of what's happening when America's enemies and Israel's enemies are testing the waters with Joe Biden, who has been presenting a very weak, I think, front on foreign policy and emboldening countries like Iran, which are ultimately behind so much of this.
So much of it. You're absolutely right. Let's call it out. Gentlemen, thank you for your time tonight. Nick Cater and James Morrow.